It started with restless nights and constant itching. Noah would wake up covered in red welts, convinced he had bed bugs. His father, Oscar, consulted countless articles on the internet, learning everything there was to know about these nocturnal pests. Desperate to find a solution, he sought professional help from an expert. But once the expert saw those bed bugs, his face turned pale, and he said, "These are not ordinary bed bugs. We have to get out of the room now." Oscar and his wife were not very happy with all this chaos in their home, especially with their young son Noah nearby. They tried to discuss evacuation, but soon realized there was no room for discussion. This was very serious, and it was best for them to leave as soon as possible. None of the investigators said a word after hearing what those things in Oscar's bed really were. At first glance, they just looked like bed bugs, but upon closer examination, they realized there was much more. Noah's parents couldn't believe it, and immediately demanded an explanation from the expert. They didn't even have time to pack their bags. They had to leave as soon as possible. Noah watched as his parents hurried away, guided by the expert and his team. He wasn't going to be the same boy after this. But what was so dangerous? Why was the expert so scared? And why did he leave the house immediately? Like any other little boy, Noah was afraid of what might or might not be hiding under his bed. So every morning, he looked under the bed. He didn't see anything under the bed, but he did see something on top of it. He had no idea what it was, or that things would get much worse from now on. Noah was startled and immediately ran downstairs. He screamed for his parents, but they didn't respond immediately. When he finally got their attention, he told them what he had discovered. At first, they didn't believe him, but when they saw the fear in his eyes, they went up with him. And now, it wasn't just Noah who was shocked. His parents, Oscar and Hilly, were also totally surprised. Oscar thought he was dealing with a familiar problem, but they seemed slightly different than bed bugs. He slowly reached out to touch her, but Noah screamed, "Dad, no! Don't do this! You don't know if it's safe." Oscar and Hilly decided to call an expert, not only to reassure Noah, but also to get rid of the insects as soon as possible. Noah was right that they shouldn't touch it. It was better left to the experts. The expert arrived quickly. Less than 15 minutes after they had made the call, he was already knocking on their door. Curiously, he did not want to go up immediately, but instead wanted the family to describe their discovery in as much detail as possible. And Oscar did as he was told. When the expert heard the description of the find, he was stunned. But he did not explain why. He just asked if he could come up right away because there was little time. Suddenly, he seemed to be in a hurry. Noah could tell something serious was going on, and he was very scared. He had reason to be. The expert bravely entered the room and carefully observed the bed with a flashlight. Without saying anything, he continued to check the bed for several minutes, while the family waited in suspense, longing for answers or at least more clarity. But suddenly, they heard a loud noise. The expert screamed in horror. He had just been so calm and focused, doing his job. And now he suddenly screamed, as if he was facing his greatest fear. Oscar hugged Noah close, telling him that everything was going to be okay. But why had the expert shouted like that? What had happened in bed? The family waited for the expert to leave the room and explain what was happening. But he did not. He stood there, leaving the rest in the dark. Oscar wondered what could be going on. He was slowly losing patience, because if it really was that serious, he needed to know immediately. The expert finally opened the door to the room but avoided eye contact with the family. "This is absurd," Oscar thought. He lost his temper and approached the man, demanding that he at least say what he had seen and what had made him scream. But the expert walked away, snapping at Oscar, "I need backup! Leave me alone!" But this only raised more questions from Oscar. Wasn't this his house? And wasn't he concerned about anyone but the expert himself? Hilly agreed with him. However, she was a little calmer than Oscar and kindly asked the expert if he could tell them what was going on and if they could do anything to help. But his answer would only worry them even more. The expert preferred Hilly's approach and finally looked at her. He made a clear effort to talk to her and Oscar, looking worriedly in Noah's direction. No matter how hard he tried to find the right words, he could barely manage to speak. He stuttered and stumbled over his words. Hilly wondered if they were just bed bugs, right? Meanwhile, the expert finally called for reinforcements. He tried to explain everything over the phone, but Oscar and Hilly realized that he had to repeat himself several times. That could only mean that his reinforcement didn't understand much either. Finally, the man hung up, waiting for the others to arrive. Oscar, Hilly, and Noah were asked to wait in the living room until the others arrived. They hesitantly agreed, but wondered what the expert really meant by reinforcements. Did he call his boss or one of his colleagues? And what would happen when they arrived? They had so many questions. Not long after, reinforcements arrived. It was a whole team. They barely paid attention to the family and only briefly nodded to little Noah. They headed straight to their bedroom, where they carefully began preparations. The operation had begun, and it was not going to be easy. Men in white suits filled Noah's room. Oscar and Hilly stood by their son's door and watched in horror as the men ransacked the room. They moved all the furniture aside and gathered around Noah's bed, carefully lifting the covers. The family could hear the men muttering beneath their masks, and they sounded very serious. But as soon as the bed was moved aside, the expert's colleagues were also shocked. Oscar, Hilly, and Noah could clearly see the red bed bugs on the sheets. There were many more than they had originally expected. They were still wondering what was so special about it. After carefully inspecting the apparent infestation, the team took a moment to talk. Oscar tried to listen, but he couldn't hear their conversation. However, it was clear to him that they seemed quite distressed by the situation. Shortly after, the team continued. They had made up their minds, and suddenly they were working on a crucial issue. Some left with samples of the red bugs, and others stayed to cordon off Noah's room. No one was allowed in anymore, which left Oscar, Hilly, and Noah with a dreadful feeling. They all knew now that there was something strange about this, but still, no one would tell them what it was. In the end, the team decided to call the police. Oscar was in shock. Was it really that serious? Was the police really necessary?